Sarah Martinez sat on the cold concrete steps outside the unemployment office, clutching a thin folder of rejection letters. At 28, she felt like her life had already reached its end. The latest "thanks but no thanks" email still glowed on her cracked phone screen. 3 years of searching, hundreds of applications, and dozens of interviews had led nowhere. Her college degree in business administration felt worthless now. The mountain of student loans grew larger each month while her savings account had hit 0 weeks ago. The small apartment she shared with 2 roommates would soon be too expensive, even with splitting the rent 3 ways. Her roommates had already started looking at her with that mixture of pity and concern that made her stomach turn. The morning had started with another interview at a marketing firm downtown. She had prepared for days, researching the company, practicing answers in the mirror, and ironing her one good interview suit until it looked almost new. The hiring manager seemed impressed with her qualifications on paper, but when he learned about her 3-year employment gap, his expression changed. The usual questions followed about what she had been doing all this time, why no one had hired her yet, and whether she was truly committed to working. Sarah had given her standard answers about continuing education, volunteer work, and staying current with industry trends. But she could see in his eyes that familiar look of doubt. Another interviewer who saw her unemployment history as a red flag rather than a streak of bad luck. The meeting ended with the predictable handshake and promise to call within a week, which they both knew meant never. Walking back to her car, Sarah noticed the parking meter had expired and a bright orange ticket was tucked under her windshield wiper. $50 she didn't have for a mistake that summed up her entire life lately. Everything she touched seemed to go wrong. Every opportunity slipped through her fingers like sand. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother asking about the interview. Sarah couldn't bring herself to respond with another disappointing update. Her family had been supportive at first, offering encouragement and connections that led nowhere. But she could feel their patience wearing thin, their suggestions becoming more desperate and less practical with each passing month. The unemployment office was her last stop before heading home to search job boards again. The counselor inside had been kind but honest about her situation. With so many qualified candidates competing for every position, employers could afford to be picky. Her employment gap had become a liability that grew worse with each passing day. Sitting on those steps, Sarah felt the weight of every rejection, every unanswered application, every well-meaning piece of advice that had led nowhere. She watched, people walking by with purpose, heading to jobs they probably took for granted. The busy street seemed to mock her with its energy and movement, while she sat motionless, stuck in a life that refused to move forward. Her laptop bag contained the same resumes and cover letters she had been carrying for months, now dog-eared and outdated. The networking events, career fairs, and informational interviews had all blended together into one long string of false hope and polite rejection. Even the temporary agencies had stopped returning her calls. The autumn wind picked up, sending dried leaves swirling around her feet. Sarah pulled her thin jacket tighter, realizing she couldn't afford to replace it when winter came. Her bank account balance flashed in her mind like a neon warning sign. $37.63 stood between her and complete financial disaster. She thought about her college friends who had launched successful careers while she struggled to get even an entry-level position. Their social media posts showed promotions, new cars, and weekend trips that seemed to come from a different world. Sarah had stopped posting altogether, unable to share anything positive about her situation. The tears came without warning, hot and angry and full of frustration that had been building for years. She wiped them away quickly, not wanting to look even more pathetic to the strangers walking past. But the emotion remained, a heavy blanket of defeat that seemed to grow heavier each day. Her phone buzzed again with another automated job alert. Email. Sarah almost deleted it without looking, but something made her open it. Another position she was overqualified for but would gladly take, at a company that would probably never call her back. She had applied to so many jobs that they all started to blur together, each one representing another small hope that would likely be crushed. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. For Sarah, it marked another day ending without progress, another 24 hours closer to complete financial ruin. She stood up slowly, feeling much older than her 28 years and prepared to face another evening of job searching that would probably lead nowhere. Tomorrow she would wake up and start the process all over again, because giving up wasn't an option even when hope seemed impossible to maintain. But sitting on those cold concrete steps, clutching her folder of rejections, Sarah had never felt more alone or defeated in her entire life. The next morning brought new problems Sarah hadn't expected. Her landlord, Mr. Chen, stood at her door with an eviction notice, giving her 30 days to catch up on 2 months of missed rent or find somewhere else to live. Her roommates watched from the kitchen as she signed the papers with shaking hands, their silence speaking louder than any words of sympathy. After Mr. Chen left, Sarah's roommate Jessica finally spoke up. They had found someone to take over her part of the lease, effective immediately if she wanted to avoid owing more money. The message was clear without being cruel. They needed a roommate who could actually pay rent, not someone drowning in debt and unemployment. Sarah packed her belongings into garbage bags and boxes, amazed at how little she actually owned after nearly 3 years of financial struggle. Her furniture had been sold months ago to pay bills. What remained fit easily into her aging Honda Civic, which had been making concerning noises lately that she couldn't afford to investigate. She drove to a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town, parking in their lot to figure out her next move. The coffee was cheap and the waitress didn't seem to mind her occupying a booth for hours with just 1 cup and a day-old muffin. Sarah spread her remaining cash on the table and counted it 3 times, hoping the numbers would somehow improve. $43 and some change represented her entire liquid assets. Her phone had been buzzing all morning with calls from credit card companies and student loan servicers. Sarah had stopped answering unknown numbers weeks ago, but the voicemails kept coming. Each one outlined consequences she already knew were coming but felt powerless to prevent. Her credit score had probably dropped so low that even predatory lenders wouldn't touch her. The diner filled with the breakfast crowd working, people grabbing coffee before heading to jobs that actually existed. Sarah watched a construction crew laugh over pancakes and felt envious of their easy camaraderie. Even minimum wage seemed like luxury when you had 0 income and mounting bills. By noon, she had applied to 17 more jobs online using the diner's free Wi-Fi. Fast food, retail, cleaning services, anything that might respond to someone with her impossible employment situation. The applications started to blur together, each one requiring the same optimistic cover letter about her enthusiasm and dedication. Her car had become her home by default, though she hadn't quite accepted that reality yet. Sarah drove to a truck stop outside town where she could park overnight without drawing attention. The parking lot was full of long-haul truckers who minded their own business, making it a safe place for someone living in their vehicle. She had researched homeless shelters earlier, but learned most had waiting lists or requirements she couldn't meet. The women's shelter required proof of domestic violence or substance abuse for admission. Regular homeless shelters had a lottery system with more demand than beds available. Sarah fell into a gap between homeless services and regular housing that seemed designed to trap people like her. The truck stop bathroom became her morning routine. She washed her hair in the sink and changed clothes in the cramped stall, trying to maintain some dignity while preparing for another day of job hunting. The attendant eventually noticed her daily visits but said nothing, perhaps understanding her situation without needing explanation. Days blended into each other as Sarah established a routine of survival. She applied to jobs during business hours, ate $8 menu items when hunger became unbearable, and slept in her car when darkness fell. The autumn nights were getting colder, and she knew winter would bring problems she wasn't prepared to face. Her phone service was scheduled for disconnection in 3 days. Without a working phone number, job hunting would become nearly impossible. Sarah had already sold everything of value, including her grandmother's wedding ring and her laptop. The phone was her last connection to the possibility of employment and normal life. At the public library, she printed resumes on paper that felt expensive compared to her budget. The librarian had started recognizing her daily visits and offered small kindnesses like letting her stay past closing time or pointing out job fairs and community resources. These tiny gestures of human decency meant more than the woman probably realized. One evening, while parked at the truck stop, Sarah watched a news report about the economy improving and unemployment rates falling. The statistics felt disconnected from her reality of rejection after rejection, of being too qualified or not qualified enough, of having gaps in employment that made her radioactive to potential employers. She had started keeping a journal to maintain some sense of purpose and routine. Writing about her experiences helped process the daily humiliation and fear that threatened to overwhelm her completely. The notebook was a gift from her sister years ago, back when life held promise and her biggest worry was choosing between job offers rather than finding any job at all. The worst part wasn't the physical discomfort of living in a car or the constant hunger from eating one meal a day. It was the invisible nature of her struggle, how people looked right through her or assumed she had chosen this lifestyle somehow. The shame of explaining her situation to family members who couldn't understand how someone with her education and work ethic had fallen so far. Sarah's reflection stared back at her from the car's rearview mirror, showing someone she barely recognized. The confident college graduate had been replaced by someone who jumped at every unexpected noise and counted quarters like they were precious gems. But somewhere deep inside, a stubborn spark refused to be completely extinguished, waiting for the right moment to ignite again. 2 weeks into living in her car, Sarah's world had shrunk to a few square blocks around the truck stop and public library. She had developed a routine that kept her invisible to most people while maintaining the basic necessities of hygiene and hope. The morning ritual of washing up in the truck stop bathroom had become automatic, though she still felt embarrassed when other customers noticed her makeshift grooming routine. Her phone had been disconnected as promised, cutting her off from potential employers just as she had feared. The library's computers became her lifeline to the outside world, though she was limited to 2 hours per day and had to compete with other patrons for access. Sarah had memorized her schedule perfectly, arriving when the library opened to maximize her online time. The job applications had slowed to a trickle as her options narrowed. Without a phone number, most employers wouldn't consider her application complete. She had tried using the library's phone number as a contact, but explaining her situation to potential employers became increasingly difficult. The few callbacks she did receive ended quickly once hiring managers learned about her housing situation. Food had become a strategic calculation rather than a pleasure. The dollar menu at various fast food restaurants provided her daily meal, usually a small burger or chicken sandwich that she ate slowly to make it last longer. Sarah had lost weight she couldn't afford to lose, and her clothes hung loose on her shrinking frame. The nights were the hardest part. October had brought frost warnings, and her thin blanket wasn't enough to keep her warm in the car. She had learned to run the engine periodically for heat, but gas money was precious and she couldn't afford to waste fuel. The truck stop parking lot felt safe but lonely, surrounded by people who were just passing through rather than stuck like she was. One cold morning while waiting for the library to open, Sarah noticed a commotion near the main intersection. A group of teenagers had surrounded an elderly man who had fallen while crossing the street. His groceries were scattered across the pavement, and the kids seemed more interested in recording the incident than helping. Sarah watched other adults hurry past without stopping, everyone too busy with their own lives to get involved. Without thinking about her own problems, Sarah rushed toward the fallen man. She helped him to his feet, checking for injuries while gathering his scattered groceries. The teenagers dispersed when they realized someone was taking charge of the situation. The elderly man, whose name was Frank, had twisted his ankle but seemed otherwise unharmed. Sarah walked with Frank to the nearby medical clinic, carrying his groceries and making sure he didn't fall again. They sat in the waiting room together, while a nurse examined his ankle, which turned out to be sprained but not broken. During their conversation, Sarah learned that Frank was a retired Navy veteran who lived alone and had few people to call for help. When Frank asked for Sarah's phone number to thank her properly later, she had to explain her situation. Rather than being judgmental or uncomfortable, Frank seemed genuinely concerned about her circumstances. He had been homeless himself after returning from Vietnam in the early 70s, before government programs existed to help veterans transition back to civilian life. Frank insisted on buying Sarah lunch at a nearby restaurant, the first real meal she had eaten in weeks. Over burgers and coffee, he shared stories about his own struggles and how random acts of kindness from strangers had kept him going during his darkest period. He talked about the people who had helped him without expecting anything in return, and how those moments of human decency had literally saved his life. As they talked, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Not pity or charity, but genuine human connection with someone who understood struggle without judgment. Frank didn't lecture her about pulling herself up by her bootstraps or suggest that she wasn't trying hard enough. He simply listened and nodded, recognizing her situation as temporary bad luck rather than personal failure. Before they parted ways, Frank gave Sarah his address and told her she was welcome to use his phone to check for job callbacks or make calls to potential employers. He lived in a small apartment 2 blocks from the library, and he was usually home in the evenings after his daily walk. The offer came with no strings attached, just one person helping another because he remembered what it felt like to need help. That evening, Sarah sat in her car feeling different than she had in weeks. Helping Frank had reminded her that she was still a person with value, not just a collection of problems and failures. The simple act of kindness had awakened something inside her that had been dormant during the long months of rejection and disappointment. She wrote in her journal about the day's events, trying to capture the feeling of being useful and appreciated. Again, Frank's stories about his own recovery gave her hope that her current situation might not be permanent. If a homeless Vietnam veteran could rebuild his life and find stability, maybe there was still a chance for her too. The night was still, cold, and her circumstances hadn't actually changed. She was still unemployed, still living in her car, still facing an uncertain future with dwindling resources. But for the first time in months, Sarah fell asleep, feeling like she might wake up tomorrow with renewed purpose rather than just another day of survival to endure. Frank's kindness had reminded her that she wasn't invisible after all. Someone had seen her as a person worth helping rather than a problem to avoid. That recognition, small as it might seem, felt like the first ray of sunlight after months of dark clouds. Sarah had been using Frank's phone for 3 days when the call she had been waiting for finally came. A local restaurant needed a server for their dinner shift, and they wanted her to come in for an interview that afternoon. The job only paid minimum wage plus tips, but it represented the first genuine interest from an employer in over a year. She arrived at the restaurant 20 minutes early, having borrowed Frank's bathroom to freshen up and change into her interview clothes. The manager, a tired-looking woman named Carol, seemed more interested in Sarah's availability than her employment history. They were short-staffed and needed someone who could start immediately, even if it was just temporary through the holiday season. The interview lasted 15 minutes and ended with Carol offering Sarah the job on the spot. She could start the next evening, working Tuesday through Saturday nights from 5 to close. The pay was exactly minimum wage, and tips were shared among all servers based on hours worked. It wasn't much, but it was income and a chance to prove herself again. Sarah accepted the job eagerly, trying not to show how desperate she felt. Carol explained the uniform requirements and told her to arrive an hour before her first shift for basic training. Black pants, white shirt, and comfortable shoes. Sarah had the pants and shirt already, but her shoes were falling apart and not suitable for restaurant work. Walking back to Frank's apartment to share the good news, Sarah calculated her finances carefully. She had enough money left to buy cheap work shoes and put gas in her car, but nothing beyond that. Her first paycheck wouldn't come for 2 weeks, assuming tips were paid nightly. The timing would be tight, but it might be enough to get her back on her feet. Frank celebrated her job offer with genuine enthusiasm, insisting they go out for coffee to mark the occasion. At the small cafe near his apartment, he shared more stories about his own journey from homelessness to stability. The transition hadn't been smooth or quick, but each small step had built momentum toward a better life. During their conversation, Frank mentioned his neighbor Marcus, who was looking for someone to help with his consulting business. Marcus was a former Navy SEAL who had started a security consulting firm after leaving the military. He needed someone to handle basic administrative tasks like scheduling correspondence and client communications. The work was part-time but paid well above minimum wage. Sarah felt a flicker of hope mixed with skepticism. Good opportunities had a way of disappearing when she needed them most, and she didn't want to get excited about something that might not materialize. But Frank insisted on introducing her to Marcus that evening, saying it couldn't hurt to explore all options. Marcus lived in the apartment next to Frank's, and Sarah could hear them talking through the thin walls before Frank knocked on his door. When Marcus opened it, Sarah was struck by his presence immediately. He was tall and fit, with an intensity in his eyes that suggested he had seen things most people couldn't imagine. But his smile was warm and genuine as Frank introduced them. They talked in Marcus's small living room, which was decorated with military memorabilia and certificates from various training programs. Marcus explained that his consulting work had grown beyond what he could handle alone, but he needed someone reliable rather than someone with extensive experience. The administrative tasks were straightforward, but his clients included government contractors and private security firms that required absolute discretion and professionalism. Sarah was honest about her employment situation and current living arrangements, expecting Marcus to end the conversation politely. Instead, he listened carefully and asked practical questions about her availability and transportation. He seemed more interested in her character and work ethic than her resume or housing situation. Marcus offered her the position, working 3 mornings per week, handling correspondence and scheduling from his home office. The pay was $15 per hour for 12 hours weekly, which would supplement her restaurant income significantly. He could provide basic office equipment and would train her on his client management systems over the following week. The offer felt almost too good to be true. Between the restaurant job and Marcus's consulting work, Sarah would have enough income to find an apartment and begin rebuilding her life. But she had learned to be cautious about opportunities that seemed perfect, knowing how quickly circumstances could change. Marcus sensed her hesitation and explained his own transition from military service to civilian life. He had struggled with finding purpose and direction after leaving the SEALs, eventually discovering that helping other veterans and security professionals gave his life meaning. His business had grown through word of mouth and referrals from satisfied clients who appreciated his expertise and integrity. Before Sarah left that evening, Marcus gave her his business card and told her to think about his offer overnight. He understood that she had other commitments and needed to make decisions that worked for her situation. There was no pressure or timeline, just an open invitation to join his small team if she was interested. Walking back to her car, Sarah felt cautiously optimistic for the first time in months. 2 job opportunities in one day felt like winning the lottery after so many rejections and disappointments. She was afraid to trust the positive turn in her fortunes, but Frank's introduction to Marcus had opened a door she never could have found on her own. That night in her car, Sarah made lists of everything she would need to make both jobs work successfully. Work shoes for the restaurant, professional clothes for the consulting work, and eventually a small apartment within walking distance of both locations. The planning felt productive rather than desperate, focused on moving forward rather than just surviving another day. Sarah's first week working both jobs tested every limit of her endurance and resourcefulness. The restaurant shifts ran from 5 until midnight, followed by early morning hours at Marcus's consulting office 3 times per week. She was averaging 4 hours of sleep nightly while still living in her car, but for the first time in over a year, she had money coming in regularly. The restaurant work was physically demanding but straightforward. Carol had been right about being short-staffed, and Sarah quickly proved herself reliable and hardworking. The other servers welcomed her without asking too many questions about her background, grateful to have help during the busy dinner rushes. Tips varied wildly from night to night, but even the worst shifts provided enough money for food and gas. Working for Marcus presented different challenges that pushed Sarah to grow professionally. His client base included former military personnel, government contractors, and private security firms that required precise communication and absolute confidentiality. Every email had to be carefully crafted, every appointment scheduled with military precision, and every interaction handled with complete professionalism. Marcus proved to be an excellent teacher, patient with Sarah's learning curve while maintaining high standards for their work output. He explained the context behind each client relationship, helping her understand how her administrative support contributed to larger security projects and consulting contracts. The work felt meaningful in a way that reminded Sarah why she had pursued her business degree in the first place. By the end of her first week, Sarah had earned enough money to rent a small studio apartment in a converted house near downtown. The space was tiny and sparsely furnished, but it had running water, electricity, and most importantly, an address she could put on job applications. The landlord required first month's rent plus deposit, which consumed most of her earnings, but having a real home felt worth any financial sacrifice. Moving into the apartment felt like emerging from a long, dark tunnel into sunlight. Sarah had forgotten simple pleasures like taking a hot shower whenever she wanted or sleeping in an actual bed instead of her car's back seat. The studio was barely furnished with a mattress on the floor and a few basic necessities, but it represented stability and hope in ways that more luxurious spaces never could. Marcus noticed the change in Sarah's demeanor immediately when she arrived for work that Monday morning. She looked rested and alert, wearing clean clothes that hadn't been slept in. Her productivity increased noticeably as she no longer had to worry about basic survival needs while trying to focus on complex administrative tasks. The restaurant shifts became easier to manage once Sarah had a place to rest between jobs. She established routines that maximized her limited time, preparing simple meals at home and getting adequate sleep despite the demanding schedule. Carol began giving her additional responsibilities, including training new servers and handling customer complaints, which came with small pay increases. 3 weeks into her new routine, Marcus approached Sarah with an opportunity that would change everything again. One of his largest clients, a defense contractor based in the state capital, needed someone to manage their regional security protocols. The position required relocating 2 hours away and would pay substantially more than her current jobs combined, but it also meant leaving the support system she had built with Frank and Marcus. The job offer represented everything Sarah had been working toward during her months of unemployment and homelessness: financial security, professional advancement, and the chance to use her education and skills in meaningful work. But accepting meant saying goodbye to the people who had helped her climb out of the deepest pit of her life, and she wasn't sure she was ready for that emotional challenge. Marcus understood her conflicted feelings and encouraged her to consider all aspects of the decision carefully. He emphasized that the opportunity came with his strongest recommendation, but only if Sarah felt ready for the increased responsibilities and geographical change. There was no pressure from him, just honest advice from someone who had become both mentor and friend. Frank's reaction was typically selfless when Sarah told him about the job offer. He encouraged her to take the position without hesitation, reminding her that their friendship wasn't dependent on physical proximity. He had watched her transform from a defeated person living in her car to a confident professional rebuilding her career, and he wanted her to continue growing rather than staying comfortable. The decision deadline was 1 week away, giving Sarah time to weigh her options and visit the potential workplace. The defense contractor flew her up for interviews and facility tours, treating her like a valued professional rather than a desperate job seeker. The position involved coordinating security protocols for multiple government contracts, work that would utilize her organizational skills and business education fully. Standing in the contractor's offices, looking out at a view of the state capitol, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Less than 2 months ago, she had been sitting on concrete steps outside the unemployment office, convinced that her life was effectively over. Now she faced a choice between comfortable stability and ambitious advancement, both representing success beyond what she had dared to hope for during her darkest days. The scared, defeated person who had lived in her car felt like someone from another lifetime. That experience had taught her resilience and resourcefulness she never knew she possessed, qualities that would serve her well, regardless of which path she chose. Sarah realized that Marcus hadn't just given her a job opportunity, he had given her back her belief in herself and her ability to overcome any challenge life presented. Sarah accepted the defense contractor position and gave her 2 weeks' notice at both the restaurant and Marcus's consulting firm. The decision had crystallized during a conversation with Marcus about risk and opportunity, when he reminded her that the greatest danger was not taking chances when they presented themselves. She had spent too many months playing it safe and getting nowhere to pass up this chance for real advancement. Her last shift at the restaurant was bittersweet. Carol and the other servers had become like family during Sarah's recovery period, providing steady work and emotional support when she needed it most. They threw a small going-away party during the slow afternoon hours, presenting her with a card signed by everyone and enough tip money to help with her relocation expenses. Working her final days with Marcus involved transitioning her responsibilities to a new assistant, while documenting all the systems and procedures she had helped develop. Marcus was genuinely proud of Sarah's professional growth and excited about her new opportunity, though he admitted he would miss having such a dedicated team member. Their working relationship had evolved into a mentorship that would continue even after she moved away. Frank helped Sarah pack her few belongings into her car for the drive to the state capitol. Her possessions still fit easily into the Honda Civic, but now they represented the foundation of a new life, rather than the remnants of a broken one. Frank gave her a small gift before she left, a framed photo of them together at the cafe where they had celebrated her first job offer just 2 months earlier. The drive to her new city felt different from all the aimless driving she had done while homeless and job hunting. This trip had a destination and purpose, carrying her toward opportunity rather than away from disappointment. Sarah had found a small apartment near her new workplace, nothing fancy but clean and affordable with room to grow as her career advanced. Her first day at the defense contractor exceeded even her optimistic expectations. The work environment was professional and challenging, with colleagues who treated her as an equal from the start. Her supervisor, a former Air Force colonel named Janet, outlined Sarah's responsibilities and expressed confidence in her ability to handle the complex security protocols they managed for various government clients. The job involved coordinating background checks, security clearances, and safety protocols for personnel working on classified projects. Sarah's attention to detail and organizational skills, honed during her months of desperate job searching, made her exceptionally well-suited for work that required absolute precision and reliability. Her colleagues quickly recognized her competence and began consulting her on processes and procedures. Within 6 months, Sarah had been promoted to senior administrator with a substantial salary increase and expanded responsibilities. She moved into a larger apartment and began building the kind of life she had dreamed about during those dark nights sleeping in her car. But more importantly, she had developed unshakable confidence in her ability to overcome any obstacle life might present. Sarah maintained regular contact with Frank and Marcus, updating them on her progress and seeking their advice on professional decisions. Frank had become like a grandfather to her, providing wisdom and perspective whenever she faced challenges. Marcus continued serving as a mentor, helping her navigate the complexities of working in the defense and security sector. 2 years after accepting the position, Sarah received an offer to join the management track within the company. Her experience living through genuine hardship had given her insights into human nature and resilience that proved invaluable when leading teams through difficult projects. Colleagues respected her not just for her professional competence, but for her empathy and understanding of struggle. Looking back on her journey from homelessness to career success, Sarah often thought about the random chance that led her to help Frank on that cold morning outside the library. That single act of kindness, performed without any thought of personal benefit, had set in motion a chain of events that transformed her entire life. She had learned that sometimes the best way to help yourself is to help someone else first. Sarah established a small scholarship fund for people transitioning out of homelessness, providing money for work clothes, transportation, and other basic necessities that could make the difference between getting hired and remaining unemployed. She knew firsthand how small barriers could become insurmountable obstacles for people who had already exhausted their resources and hope. Her story became an inspiration to others facing similar challenges, though Sarah never dwelled on the darkest parts of her experience. Instead, she focused on the lessons learned about resilience, the importance of human kindness, and the truth that circumstances can change dramatically when you least expect it. The woman who had once felt invisible and defeated had become someone others looked to for guidance and hope. The business degree that had once felt worthless now served as the foundation for a career that gave her both financial security and personal satisfaction. But Sarah knew the real education had come from those months of struggle, teaching her strength and compassion that no classroom could provide. She had learned that being washed out and defeated was only temporary, but the character built during recovery would last a lifetime.